Imagine slicing through the icy fjords of Norway at 12 knots, your ship groaning with power, wind catching the sail, and 32 warriors rowing in perfect unison. This isn't just a scene from a saga, it's the legacy of the Gokstad ship, the most famous Viking vessel ever unearthed. But what made this ship so special? Who manned it? And how did it change the course of northern history? Today we dive into the story of the Gokstad ship, its manpower, its resurrection, and its lasting legacy. To sail the Gokstad ship wasn't just a job, it was a way of life, a full-body commitment forged in discipline, sweat, and strategy. This wasn't a ship you could coast on. Every plank of oak and every creak of rope demanded something from its crew. Let's start with the basics. The Gokstad ship stretched nearly 24 metres long. That's the length of a modern basketball court. On each side were 16 oar ports, giving us 32 rowers in total. These weren't casual paddlers. These were hardened sailors, warriors even, trained to keep rhythm in the freezing wind, rowing in perfect sync with brutal efficiency. Each man was assigned a single oar, roughly 17 feet long, carved from sturdy timber and designed to bite deep into the water with every pull. And if you think rowing sounds simple, think again. These oars weren't featherweight fiberglass like you'd see in modern boats. They were solid, heavy, and designed to handle the choppy waters of the North Sea. Controlling one took upper body strength, core endurance, and impeccable timing. How did they stay in sync? Through rhythm and ritual. Rowers often followed a beat set by a drummer or a chant from the shipmaster. It wasn't about brute force alone, it was about moving like one living organism. Miss a beat and you risked snapping your oar, injuring a crewmate, or losing momentum during a critical moment. Like approaching shorelines during a raid, and rowing wasn't even a full-time job. The men rowing one moment might be wielding axes the next. These ships were filled with dual-role crewmen, sailors, warriors, navigators. You had to be good at everything. Then there was the helmsman, often an experienced veteran who understood the seas like a second language. Steering wasn't done with a wheel, it was a giant steering oar, mounted on the starboard side. This oar had to be manned constantly, especially in rough seas. Adjusting it even a few inches could determine whether the ship cut smoothly through the waves or got tossed off course like driftwood. And let's not forget the riggers, the men responsible for managing the sail. The Gokstad ship featured a large square sail, probably made of tightly woven wool, and treated with animal fat or resin to make it more water resistant. This sail wasn't just for cruising, it was an essential part of covering long distances quickly. But raising that sail wasn't easy. The mast stood about 10 metres tall, and the sail itself would have caught the wind like a wall. It took teamwork to hoist the sail, trim the lines, and adjust the rigging depending on the wind's direction. One mistake here, one rope too loose or too tight, and the sail could tear, the mast could snap, or the whole ship could veer off its heading. Weather was its own enemy. In calm seas you could switch between oars and sail, but in stormy waters, you needed to make split-second decisions. Reefing the sail, pulling it in to reduce surface area, was dangerous. Sailors had to climb the rigging or balance on a swaying deck, tightening wet ropes with frostbitten hands while icy spray slammed into their faces. Below deck, or more accurately, on the lower planks, was where the rest of the crew functioned during long voyages. They needed someone managing supplies, someone cooking food over a fire pit, laid on a layer of sand, or in an iron cauldron. They'd use dried fish, grains and salted meat. The cook's job might not seem heroic, but morale and warmth often depended on that one hot meal a day. Also essential, the lookout, positioned either near the mast or standing at the prow, eyes scanning the horizon for rocks, ships or shoreline. In fog or dusk, spotting land or enemy sails, a minute early could mean the difference between ambush and escape. You also had navigators, who used their knowledge of stars, sun, ocean currents and coastal landmarks to guide the ship. This was long before the compass arrived in Scandinavia. Instead, they relied on a combination of mental maps, sun compasses, and dead reckoning. The navigators were often respected elders or seasoned explorers, men who'd been on voyages across the North Sea, to Ireland, Britain, or down the rivers of the Russ. Every crew member served multiple functions. If you were a rower, you were also a fighter. If you rigged the sail, you might also need to bail out seawater or repair broken planks mid-voyage. They worked in shifts, especially during long voyages where rowing continued day and night. Rest meant curling up under a cloak on the deck while your comrades kept the ship moving. And the environment, absolutely punishing. There were no cabins, no below-deck bunks, just an open-air deck, exposed to wind, rain, snow, and sea spray. Temperatures could dip well below freezing. Wet clothes rarely dried, and frostbite was common in winter crossings. Yet these men endured, because the ship was more than transport. It was survival. It was power. Let's also talk about coordination during landfall. The Gokstad ship had no keel deep enough to require a dock. Thanks to its shallow draft, it could land directly on beaches or riverbanks. But doing that safely required coordination. Rowers had to shift weight, raise the rudder, and sometimes jump into waist-deep water to drag the vessel ashore. And once they arrived, the crew snapped into a combat-ready unit. Shields stored on the outer rail were quickly grabbed and strapped on. Weapons, spears, axes, swords were ready within seconds. The transition from sailor to raider was seamless. That versatility was built into the very design of the ship and the skill set of every man aboard. In total, a fully functioning Gokstad crew would consist of 35 to 40 men, each trained not only to row but to navigate, fight, repair, cook, and survive. It was more than a crew. It was a brotherhood of specialists, living in unison with their ship, bound together by shared purpose and sheer resilience. The Gokstad ship was a marvel of engineering, but it was nothing without the men who gave it life. Their stamina, knowledge, and discipline turned planks of oak into a predator of the sea. But as skilled as the crew had to be, and as mighty as the Gokstad ship once sailed across the fjords, time is a merciless tide. Eventually its voyages came to an end, not in battle, not in wreckage, but in honour. The ship was pulled ashore one final time, not to be repaired but to become a tomb. Its hull became a coffin. Its deck, a monument. Buried beneath layers of earth, it waited, silently, for nearly 1,000 years. And then in a quiet Norwegian field, long after the age of Vikings had faded into myth, someone disturbed the soil. What happened next would ignite one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in Scandinavian history. For nearly 1,000 years, the mighty Gokstad ship slept beneath a mound of earth in southern Norway, hidden, undisturbed, and protected by time. A ghost of the Viking Age, sealed under layers of turf, clay, and mystery. That all changed in the year 1880. On a cold spring day near Sandefjord in Vestfold, a local farmer named Sven Finnerud was ploughing a field when he noticed something odd. His plough kept catching on what seemed like stone. But not quite. Curiosity piqued, he alerted local authorities. Soon after, Norway's leading archaeologist Nikolai Nikolaisen was dispatched to investigate. What he found wasn't just significant, it was monumental. Beneath a massive burial mound known as Gokstad Haugen lay the preserved skeleton of a full Viking ship. Not just fragments, not just traces, a nearly complete longship, measuring 23.8 metres long and 5.2 metres wide, built entirely of oak. Its sleek, symmetrical hull was a masterpiece of clinker-built construction, with overlapping planks held together by iron rivets, still remarkably intact after centuries underground. As the archaeologist dug deeper, the full scale of the burial revealed itself. This wasn't just a ship, it was a royal grave, a ritual interment of a Viking elite, possibly a king or a warlord. The body itself was missing, likely looted centuries earlier, but the surrounding grave goods painted a vivid picture of power and prestige. Inside the ship they found the remains of 3 ornate wooden sleds, a tent frame, a bed platform, carved animal headposts possibly used in ceremonial displays, remnants of food and drink indicating funeral feasting, bones of horses, dogs, and even exotic birds like peacocks, creatures not native to Norway and likely brought from foreign lands. The peacocks alone told a tale. This wasn't a local chief. This was a man of global connections, someone with the wealth and reach to import animals from distant markets, perhaps via the trade routes that stretched through Byzantium and beyond. But the ship itself was the crown jewel, crafted from oak planks about 2.5 centimetres thick. The hull curved gracefully toward a narrow bow and stern. It had 16 pairs of oar holes, 32 in total, along with a keel plank that stabilised it in the open sea. There was no dragon's head on this ship. It was sleek, fast, and made for both war and travel. Excavating such a structure wasn't easy. The archaeologists had to move slowly, methodically, recording every detail. And remember, this was 1880. There were no bulldozers, no laser scanners, no digital mapping. Every measurement was done by hand. Every plank numbered, sketched, and documented with precision. The biggest challenge came when exposing the ship to air. After nearly a millennium sealed in cold, moist soil, the wood began to dry and crack rapidly. The team had to work fast to stabilise the oak, wrapping it in cloth, applying preservative oils, and carefully disassembling the more delicate parts for transportation. Once removed from the mound, the restoration began, a massive undertaking that took years. Using the original parts as a guide, craftsmen reconstructed the ship, replacing broken sections with new oak, and using traditional Viking techniques where possible. Rivets were forged by hand, curves were shaped with steam and muscle. Every detail was measured against the archaeological record. By the end, they had done more than preserve a ship, they had resurrected history. The Gokstad ship was moved to what is now the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, where it has remained a centrepiece of Viking maritime heritage. It rests on a raised platform, its hull fully visible, its proud bow still tilting forward as if ready to conquer the waves once again. But the story doesn't end there. In 1893, inspired by the original discovery, a full-size replica of the Gokstad ship, named the Viking, was built in Norway by expert shipwright Magnus Andersen. Using traditional methods and hand tools, the crew replicated every curve and rivet of the original vessel. Then, in an audacious move that shocked the world, they set sail across the Atlantic Ocean. From Norway to Newfoundland, then down to New York, and finally to Chicago for the World's Columbian Exposition. Yes, that's right. The replica Gokstad ship crossed the Atlantic, navigating the same waters that Norse explorers had a millennium earlier. The journey proved once and for all that Viking ships weren't just coastal vessels. They were capable of deep-sea exploration, long-distance trade, and transoceanic travel. Today you can still visit the replica in Chicago, a living testament to Viking craftsmanship and determination. As for the original, it stands quietly in its museum, visited by hundreds of thousands each year. But behind that quiet presence is a thunderous story, a tale of burial, rediscovery, and rebirth. The Gokstad ship wasn't just a relic, it was a revelation. It forced historians to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about the Vikings, not just as raiders, but as explorers, engineers, and master seafarers. But what made this ship truly legendary wasn't just that it survived the centuries. It was how far ahead of its time it really was. Because when you compare the Gokstad ship to other vessels of the early Middle Ages, you begin to see it for what it was: a technological masterpiece, a game changer, a floating symbol of Viking dominance. Let's take a closer look. To understand the full impact of the Gokstad ship, you have to do more than admire its sleek design or the craftsmanship of its oak planks. You have to compare it to everything else that was floating on water in the 9th century. And when you do, the difference is like comparing a sports car to a hay cart. Let's start with its most important feature: versatility. The Gokstad ship wasn't built for one single job. It wasn't just a cargo hauler, a war machine, or a fishing vessel. It was all of those things at once. That's a rare quality in early medieval ship design. Most European vessels of the time, like the Frankish roundships or the Saxon cogs, were heavy, sluggish, and primarily used for coastal trade. They had deep hulls that made them stable for carrying goods, but useless in shallow water. Landing on a beach? Forget it. They needed docks and harbours which made their movements predictable and easily intercepted. The Gokstad ship. It had a shallow draft, meaning it could float in less than a metre of water. That allowed Viking crews to sail up rivers, cross narrow inlets, or even pull the ship across land when necessary. This ability wasn't just a tactical bonus, it was revolutionary. It meant a Viking fleet could strike from the sea, raid a monastery, retreat inland, and vanish into the fjords before anyone could mount a defence. But it wasn't just the terrain it conquered, it was the sea itself. The Gokstad ship featured a keel plank running along the bottom, which acted as a backbone and stabilised it in open waters. Unlike earlier Scandinavian boats that hugged the coast, this design meant the Gokstad ship could navigate the open ocean with confidence. In fact, that's how the Vikings reached Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, centuries before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west. And let's not forget speed. Modern estimates suggest the Gokstad ship could reach up to 12 knots, or about 14 miles per hour, under sail. That may not sound impressive by today's standards, but in the early medieval period, that was blindingly fast. Most ships were lucky to manage 4 or 5 knots, and even then only under ideal conditions. Viking longships were faster, more agile, and required fewer crew to maintain high speeds. But the brilliance of the Gokstad ship didn't stop with its hydrodynamics. Let's talk construction technique, specifically the clinker-built method. This meant that each plank slightly overlapped the one below it, and they were riveted together using hand-forged iron nails. The result? A hull that was both strong and flexible. It could bend with the waves rather than resist them. That made it more durable in rough seas and less prone to splitting or capsizing. And then there's the sail. Mounted on a 10-metre tall mast, the ship's woolen sail could be raised or lowered depending on the wind. When conditions were right, it provided a powerful burst of propulsion. But unlike many early sailing ships, the Gokstad ship didn't rely solely on wind. The dual-use design, sail and oar, meant the crew could adapt instantly. No wind? No problem. Drop the sail and man the oars. Enemy spotted? Lower the mast, go silent, rowing close. That kind of flexibility made Viking raids a logistical nightmare for their enemies. Even the shield rail along the gunnels, those iconic round shields, wasn't just decorative. It served as instant armour, protecting the rowers from incoming projectiles while allowing quick access during battle. If needed, shields could be deployed in seconds, turning the ship into a floating phalanx. The rudder on the Gokstad ship was mounted on the starboard side, steerboard, as it was called, which is where we get the term starboard today. But it wasn't a fixed rudder. It was adjustable, so it could be raised when landing on shore or navigating tight river bends. That tiny innovation, huge advantage. And while we're at it, storage. Below the deck, the Gokstad ship had just enough space to stow goods for long-distance travel. Barrels of dried fish, smoked meat, fresh water, and valuables like amber or furs. It wasn't a cargo ship by definition, but it didn't need to be. It was built to travel light and fast, with just enough supplies to reach distant markets or quickly escape danger. Now let's scale out and ask, what did this mean for the Viking world? Well, everything. The design of ships like the Gokstad enabled the rapid expansion of Norse influence across Europe and beyond. They raided the coasts of Ireland, Britain, and France with terrifying speed. They settled in places like Iceland, Greenland, and even Vinland, believed to be part of modern-day Canada. They traded as far as the Middle East, bringing back silk, spices, and coins from the Abbasid Caliphate. They even made their way down the rivers of Russia, forming trade routes that would become the Varangian trade network, and eventually integrating with the Byzantine Empire through the famed Varangian Guard. And none of it, would have been possible without ships like the Gokstad. It wasn't just a tool, it was a vehicle of civilization, a force multiplier that turned a scattered collection of northern tribes into one of the most mobile, feared, and connected cultures of the early medieval world. While other civilizations built walls, the Vikings built ships, and the Gokstad was one of the finest they ever made. It's not hyperbole to say that this vessel changed history. It's an icon of innovation, a symbol of speed and strength, and a testament to a society that understood the ocean not as a barrier, but as a highway to opportunity. So here we are, after sailing through skill, burial, rediscovery and legacy. We come to rest where the Gokstad ship rests, preserved, respected, and revered. It's easy to look at this vessel today, sitting silent inside the Viking Ship Museum, and think of it as just a relic, just wood and nails. But that would be a mistake. The Gokstad ship is not just a physical object, it's a story, a reminder of a time when the sea was both a threat and a path to greatness, when a crew of 32 men could cross oceans using only muscle, wool, and the stars. And more than anything, it's proof that the Vikings weren't just raiders and looters, they were craftsmen, navigators, and visionaries. They built a maritime culture so advanced, so adaptable, that it reshaped the very edges of the known world. This one ship changed everything. Because of the Gokstad and ships like it, ideas travelled farther, trade spread faster, raids struck deeper, settlements popped up in places where no one thought Norse feet would tread. From the coasts of Ireland to the heart of Constantinople, Viking longships left a wake that history is still chasing. And now, more than a millennium later, we still look to this ship for answers, for inspiration, for that deep, quiet awe that comes from standing in the presence of something truly timeless. So the next time you hear the word Viking, don't just think of horned helmets and TV drama. Think of oak soaked in salt water. Think of shields clashing against the rail. Think of the rhythmic sound of oars pulling through fjords at dawn. Think of the Gokstad. If you enjoyed this journey through Viking history, do us a favour. Give that like button a good swing like a battle axe, and subscribe so you don't miss the next voyage. We've got more tales coming, of longships, warriors, lost settlements, forgotten queens, and ancient mysteries still echoing through the fjords. And we want to hear from you. What part of Viking history do you want us to explore next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Until then, may your shields be strong, your sails be full, and your curiosity never run aground. Thanks for watching.